I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
Welcome to Deep Cuts, the podcast where we pick a topic and walk you through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty so you can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at your next forced social function. Today's topic is...
Anne Perry.
Who was Anne Perry? Well, she was a prolific author known for writing historical detective fiction, a career that began in 1979. But she harbored a dark secret in the early part of her career, namely that she was involved in murdering a friend's mother when she was only 15 years old, in one of the most famous murder cases in all of New Zealand's history. Act 1. Keep smiling, keep shining, knowing that you can always count on me for murder. Anne Perry was born Juliet Marion Hume on October 28, 1938. She was the eldest of two children to Hilda Marion Hume, a marriage counselor, and Dr. Henry Rainsford Hume, a physicist who played a role in Britain's atomic weapons research program. At 6 years old, Juliet developed tuberculosis, and at 8, she was sent to live in the Bahamas with a foster family for her health, as medical science at the time believed that warmer climates could help her symptoms. She rejoined her family at 13, who had since moved to Christchurch, New Zealand, as her father took a job at Cambridge University College. Juliet was sent to Christchurch Girls High School, where she met her best friend, Pauline Yvonne Parker.
Wow. Like, imagine if you were just like 8 years old and you just like got sick and they're just like, all right, you just have to like go live with a different family for like 4 years.
Yeah, that's not going to fuck you up at all.
Yeah, that's fucking crazy.
What do we think of this Anne Perry as a teenager photo, this Juliet photo? How would you describe her?
I mean, she definitely looks like a future murder mystery novelist. She looks like Tim Burton would just shit himself if he saw her.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say she looks like someone who perennially was in the back of the library reading books she wasn't supposed to.
100%. Anne Perry looks like she knows the exact date and time that you are going to die.
Anne Perry looks like the type of girl who wrote erotic vampire fiction before that was cool.
Anne Perry looks like she is the one and true author of
My Immortal.
My Immortal.
Anne Perry looks like the type of girl that pines for being asked to the dance by the popular kid, and then when that happens, freaks out and says really mean shit in order to self-sabotage herself.
Anne Perry looks like if Tumblr had existed whenever she was a kid, nobody would have ever gotten murdered.
Yeah. The two girls initially bonded over both facing illnesses early in life. Juliet with tuberculosis, while Pauline had suffered from osteomyelitis, a type of bone infection. However, as they spent time together, they gradually began developing a fantasy world that was populated by celebrities they looked up to at the time, like actor James Mason and opera singer Mario Lanza, whom they considered to be saints. They even formulated their own religion, creating a parallel dimension called the Fourth World that functioned as their heaven. They thought that during moments of true spiritual enlightenment, they could reach this higher plane. Pauline's diary delved into this religion in greater detail, with the following being one such entry.
1953, April 3rd, Friday. Today, Juliet and I found the key to the fourth world. On the day of the death of Christ, everything was full of peace and bliss. We then realized we had the key. We had an extra part of our brain which can appreciate the fourth world. When we die, we will go to the fourth world. But meanwhile, on 2 days every year, we may use the key and look into the beautiful world. On this day of finding the key to the way through the clouds. I mean, these people, they sound like the girls that tried to murder their friend for Slender Man.
Totally, yes. The girls spent much of their time with one another, even seemingly getting sick if they were forced to be apart for too long. Their families had concerns these two girls were lesbians due to their bond with each other, with homosexuality being viewed as a mental illness at the time in the early 1950s, and a crime in and of itself. But they continued allowing the girls to see each other.
Man, that dynamic is just so fucked up where it's like, and this is mostly with like gay women, where like if two women spend too much time together, oh, they must be gay.
Yeah.
But then whenever you have two women who are in a relationship, everybody's like, oh, they're just good friends.
Yeah, they're just gal pals.
Yeah, like that's such a fucked up polarity. It's like people refuse to allow gay women, or even just women in general, to just have their own identity ever. They have to fit into like a specific box of some expectation of what women should be.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, they're hanging out all the time. Oh, they're just good friends. They're not lovers who have been living together in a committed relationship for a decade. But then if two people are hanging out and they are just friends, it's like, oh, they're gay. Somebody stop this.
Their friendship was soon threatened, with Juliet's parents separating in 1954. Dr. Henry Hume resigned from the university, and the family was set to go back to England. However, the plan was for Juliet to stay with other family members in South Africa for her health. Juliet didn't want to be separated from Pauline. According to reports, Juliet's parents might have been fine with Pauline going to South Africa with her, but Pauline believed her parents would never let her go. It's here they hatched the plan to let Pauline stay with Juliet. They would kill Pauline's parents. As much was later revealed in an entry from Pauline's diary.
Why could mother not die? Dozens of people are dying all the time, thousands. So why not mother and father too?
Their plan was to murder Pauline's mother and presumably her father so that they could go to South Africa together. From there, they wanted to go to New York City or Hollywood, where they would try and publish their various writings concerning this fantasy world they had created for themselves, as they had already had books and plays about the world ready to go. On June 22nd, 1954, the pair initiated what Pauline wrote in her diary as the day of the happy event.
Oh my God, that is fucking creepy.
Fucking brutal.
Like, this is fucked up. It really is just the Slender Man girls.
Yeah.
Like, these are one or both mentally ill children, or one mentally ill children and then a person who's just like allows themselves to be spun out of control by other people.
Yeah. Juliet and Pauline invited Pauline's mother, Honora Reaper, wow, that's a cool name.
And also a little ironic.
Yeah, out to tea. Afterward, they took a walk through Victoria Park, leading Honora to a pink charm they had left on the path so that she would examine it. As she bent over to look at the charm, Pauline took out a brick that she had placed into a stocking. While the girls initially believed they would kill Honora just with one blow, it took decidedly longer. The two girls went back and forth, taking turns beating Honora to death. Later, reports indicated that Honora suffered 45 external injuries with 24 wounds in the face and scalp. The beating was so severe, the brick actually came out of the stocking, but eventually they succeeded in killing Pauline's mother. While the girls plotted to kill Honora Reaper, there was still the matter of getting away with it, which they didn't seem to have thought out at all.
My God. I mean, first of all, Jesus Christ. They beat her to death with a brick.
With a fucking brick. And they beat her so hard that the sock they put the brick in ripped.
That is fucked. I mean, number one, it's fucked. Number two, once again, these girls had some issues. And number three, like, Jesus, like they were so much like, oh, we can't be separated, that they're like, we gotta murder one of our parents so that we can stay together as friends.
It's interesting too, because it's such kid logic, you know?
Yeah.
Of like, what if you just ran away together?
Yeah. Anything that isn't murdering somebody. And that's like the same thing with anything. Obviously, whenever, you know, somebody feels trapped in a relationship and they're being abused, like that's one thing, and you can kind of, in a way, sympathize. But when you hear stories of like, oh, I just like didn't want to be married to this person, so I murdered them. It's like, why didn't you just leave? Like, why didn't you just get a divorce? Anything short of killing.
Yeah.
Like, and it also, it seems, and I guess because they're kids, but it seems like they never do think through the part of like, what happens after this? Because there was that thing recently, another story where a 14-year-old girl, this just happened. She murdered her mom, and she was tried to murder her stepdad, and she didn't succeed. She goes into her house. There's footage of all of it. It's all caught on camera. She just goes into her house and gets a gun and just shoots her mom. And it's like, what did you think was going to happen after this?
That's a perfect transition into this type of logic being on display here. They returned to the kiosk where they had just gotten tea to tell the owners how Honora had fallen and hit in her head. They did so while covered in blood themselves, and their story quickly fell apart. Detectives found Honora
had been attacked with an animal ferocity seldom seen in the most brutal murders.
They also found the bloodied brick not too far from the body. Juliet and Pauline were quickly arrested and charged with Honora's murder, with a trial following that would captivate the entire country of New Zealand. The age of the girls, the brutality of the murders, and the subsequent rumors that they were lesbians made it the trial of the year. I don't think this is what they mean when they say, be gay, do crime.
No, they don't mean like be in a clandestine lesbian relationship and then murder your parents. Who, by the way, were not, I mean, I guess they were like concerned that they were gay and that's not good, but they weren't like trying to stop them from being friends. They specifically allowed them to be friends. So it's not even like they were like killing them like to stop some kind of oppression or something like that. They were just separating because they were moving.
It appeared to be an open and shut case. The prosecution got its hands on Pauline's diary, where she had outlined their intention to murder her mother. She had even written out the intention to use a brick in one entry.
We decided to use a rock in a stocking rather than a sandbag. We discussed the molder. I feel keyed up, as if I were planning a surprise party. Jesus, my God. These kids, they got some problems.
The only real defense Juliet and Pauline's team could manage was insanity, as defense counsel Brian McClelland would later discuss.
Well, the problem that was... I can't even do it.
The problem was they'd both confessed. And the only defense we had was insanity. But how could we find the two of them insane? And then this chap, Reginald Medlicott, came along with a wonderful idea that they had a folie à deux. So we went with that.
Man, the second worst folie à deux in history.
However, the insanity defense went nowhere, as psychiatrists found that while the two girls may have suffered from narcissism, paranoia, and attachment anxiety, they weren't insane. To be honest, it was probably for the best that the insanity plea didn't pan out, at least for the girls. If they were found insane, they probably would have been sent to a psychiatric hospital for the rest of their lives, and if the court determined that they were, in fact, homosexuals, even after them claiming they weren't, the quote-unquote cure as a diagnosis at the time in New Zealand was a prefrontal lobotomy. Instead, Juliet and Pauline were merely found guilty of murder. It took only 2 hours and 12 minutes to reach a verdict. A news program at the time noted, at the time of the conviction,
Parker looked across at Hume, whispered something, and they both smiled.
Since the girls were underage, by New Zealand law at the time, they couldn't have been sentenced to death. However, they were sent to different prisons, and being separated was likely far worse for them in their minds. Juliet went to Mount Eden prison in Auckland, while Pauline was sentenced to Arahara Borstal, just north of Wellington. On the day of the sentencing, a female officer overheard Juliet whisper to Pauline,
"The old girl took a bit more killing than we thought."
The officer tried to reprimand her over the remark, but Juliet shot back.
Oh, aren't we the perfect little policewoman?
I hate to say this, but I kind of love that.
That's a pretty good retort for a criminally insane child to make.
I kind of love that, though. They each served 5 years in prison before being released. Pauline Parker changed her name to Hilary Nathan and mostly lived a reclusive life in the United Kingdom. It's been reported that she deeply regretted killing her mother when she got older. Meanwhile, Juliet Hume changed her name to Anne Perry and began work on fulfilling the idyllic life that she had once envisioned for her and Pauline to share together.
Man, the idea that the reason why they committed this crime is to be together. They didn't want to be separated. They did this heinous thing. And then, like, you know, no matter what, they were going to get caught and go to prison. Like, there's no way that kids, like, murder their fucking parent and then get away with it. But so they get caught. And it's one thing if they just, like, went to jail forever or, like, went to the psychiatric hospital. Like, that's fucked up. But, you know, it's like, okay, we did this insane thing and then it did not work. But this is almost kind of like so much more powerfully a waste or a tragedy because they murdered this person so that they could be together and never be separated again. And then they just through all these different chains of circumstance got extremely light sentences for this crime. And only, I mean, it's still a long time, but they only went to prison for 5 years. And then when they got out, they didn't even stay together. So it was just truly a pointless act.
I wonder, though, if there was some sort of like, if you guys get back together, the shit's gonna hit the fan. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, like, the court-ordered separation. Like,
Yeah.
you can't be around this person. Yeah, could be. Stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
Hackers, they get, like, criminally charged where they're not allowed to use a computer anymore.
Mike Deanna not being able to draw. Yeah. Or even, what's the woman who had sex, who's a teacher and had sex with...
Oh, Mary Kay Letourneau?
Yeah, where she was like, she couldn't be around the kid that she molested and then ultimately broke that repeatedly and kept getting pregnant. And then he like petitioned the court to have that separation order rescinded. And
Yeah, and then they were married and they got divorced and then she died of cancer.
yeah, I hate to be that guy, but like, fuck that woman.
Yeah,
right?
it's fucked up.
All of that is fucked.
Definitely don't think you're that guy. I think many people share your opinion.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
People do not think kindly of her, and for good reason. It's a fucked up story.
Yeah, terrible. Speaking of terrible things, I wonder, do we have anything that we want to promote this episode?
Saying promote is a strong word because it's the same thing. It's the same book. I've had it for 5 years. If you want to pick up my book, Deadbolt AI Private Eye, you can go to dapricewrites.com. Pick that book up. What do you got? What do you got cooking? What do you got? What
How many more times can you say what?
What philosophical parent are you murdering this week?
Thank you so much for asking. You know, I have something I would like to promote. It's called Mary Tyler Moorhawk, my hybrid novel, graphic novel out from Top Shelf Productions. It's a comic/novel, takes place 100 years in the future. It's about a guy named Dave Baker who's a journalist who's obsessed with a TV show called Mary Tyler Moorhawk that only lasted 9 episodes. He sets out on an existential journey to try and figure out why the show only lasted 9 episodes and who created it and what happened to all the actors in it. It turns out his world gets turned upside down when the guy who made the show was actually also named Dave Baker. What? Comic sections are adventures of the titular family, Mary Tyler Moorhawk.
I got it right here.
And I worked for forever
in the
on
shrink
it.
wrap.
Inlay shrink wrap.
I never read it. No, I'm just joking. This is this is another copy.
Yeah.
I have 3 of them.
Andrew and Spandrew, both really good friends, and they support. You should be a really good friend and support because the book needs some help. Do you have anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, you can follow us on social media by going to Facebook, and you can search Deep Cuts Podcast. We got a page. You can also join our Facebook group by going to Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. We have a community of listeners there that hang out, talk about the show, make memes, talk about other stuff sometimes, share cool, Deep Cuts related stuff that's kind of in our stratosphere of interests. You can also join our Discord server, bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord. It's a similar thing, but kind of a different vibe. There's like games you can play there. It's maybe a little bit more familiar. It's kind of more of a community where people actually know each other and kind of talk about stuff, outside of the show and talk about how the show interacts with their lives and things. It's like a pretty cool little vibe going on. You can follow us on Instagram at DeepCutsPod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at Dead Boy Detective.
Act 2. Write What You Know. After getting released from prison in November of 1959, Juliet Hume began going by Anne Perry, which was her stepfather's surname. She worked as a flight attendant in England for a time before moving to the United States and joining the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1968. From there, she moved to the village of Portmahomack in Scotland to live with her mother. A year later, she published her first novel, The Cater Street Hangman, under her pseudonym. The novel introduces the inspector Thomas Pitt and Charlotte Ellison, who would spin off into various other detective novels over the years written by Perry. And the book was a decent success in the United States, launching a lucrative writing career for Anne Perry. She continued writing books using the Thomas Pitt character, and in 1990, she introduced a new fictional detective, Inspector William Monk, in The Face of a Strangler.
This kind of reminds me a little bit, it's not exactly the same thing, but it reminds me of, there's this dude on TikTok, and I'm sure you must have seen at least something about this guy, but he started going viral on TikTok because he had this story about the fact that, 5 years ago or something, he worked in a homeless shelter, and he was attacked by a mentally ill homeless man with a katana. And the guy basically almost completely severed both of his arms. He just like lost it and just attacked this guy and was hacking him with a katana. And he like almost cut all the way through both of his forearms. And so he had these massive surgeries and these skin grafts. And, you know, his arms were just like, you know, mutilated, and they were able to like skin graft and kind of get them back to normal. And he doesn't have full feeling in them. The nerves were like so heavily damaged that he just has very minimal feeling. He can't move them very well. And he has a TikTok channel where he basically tells that story, and then like he does like mutual aid. He like still works in mutual aid and kind of preaches about how like, you know, despite the fact that I was attacked by this homeless man, I still feel like it's like important to like help this community. His whole thing is like motivational, talking about like mutual aid and stuff, and like, you know, help other people to be a good person or whatever. And then at some point, somebody just like did some digging and found out that he was a school shooter.
Whoa!
And that whenever he was in high school, he shot up his school and like went to prison for years. And then like got out and started doing mutual aid. And like there was discourse about it on TikTok for like a week. I mean, there was people being like, fuck this guy, he's a school shooter. And then there was other people being like, I'm an abolitionist, I believe in restorative justice, but fuck this guy, he's a school shooter. Like they're like, nobody was having it.
The lead singer of Darkness weighs in and he's like, I believe in a thing called love, but not fuck this guy.
I mean, he might have done that because the lead singer of The Darkness, he has like a TikTok channel.
Yeah.
He has a show called Justin Hawkins Saves the World, I think. It's like a vlog. He just talks about stuff.
I believe in a thing called love, but not this guy.
So there's a possibility that that did happen. And he did say that. There's a term for it, actually. I'm using that as a frame of reference, but there's a fucking term for this, and it's called milkshake ducking. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So Ann Perry was milkshake duck. She was like the first ever milkshake duck. And milkshake duck comes from a tweet, and I think it might have been Drill. Drill is like a famous shit poster on Twitter. He just posts very viral shit post tweets, which is a fucking weird thing to say. What is this world we live in? I think it was a Drill tweet, but it might have been somebody else. But basically the tweet was, I just saw a video of a duck drinking a milkshake, so adorable. And then there was like a second tweet that was like, turns out the milkshake duck was a racist. And it was like a joke. It was like somebody's joke tweet talking about how people get, you know, outed as being horrible people in their past in the age of the internet. And so now it's called getting milkshake ducked whenever you get super viral famous on the internet for like something very wholesome, and then people find out retroactively that you did some terrible thing.
Jeez, wow. I've never heard that term. And also, yeah. Ann Perry.
Most recently, the new lead singer of Linkin Park got milkshake ducked.
But I feel like that wasn't a full thing, right? Because didn't she say she was accused of like supporting Danny Masterson, and then she was like, yeah, I supported him initially, and then I went to the fucking trial, saw everybody, and was like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah, she released a statement, but initially that's what happened. Like, they announced this new singer. Everybody was either really excited about it, or they were like, no, Chester is the only singer that there ever could be. But for the most part, the people who were excited about it were like, she's really good, this is awesome. And then somebody was like, wait a minute, she's a fucking Scientologist and she went to Danny Masterson's trial or whatever. And then everybody was like, wow, new lead singer of Linkin Park was milkshake ducked in 3 hours. But then, she released a statement and stuff. But that's what a milkshake duck is.
Understood. During this period, Ann Perry was living the dream that she had always envisioned for herself and Pauline. The courts naturally couldn't forbid the two of them from ever seeing each other again, but it generally doesn't seem like they kept in touch after their respective releases from prison. Like many friendships, it seems like they probably just drifted apart, especially since Perry was becoming a recognizable figure in the literary world, while the newly dubbed Hillary Nathan wanted to stay out of the limelight if possible.
Like most friendships, where at one point early on in the friendship, you murder one of the other's parents so that you can never be separated again, they drifted apart naturally.
But while the two's murder case was a big deal in New Zealand, it hadn't necessarily caught on globally, and the vast majority of people had no idea that Ann Perry was actually teenage murderer Juliet Hume. That all changed with the 1994 film Heavenly Creatures, directed by Peter Jackson, where Melanie Lynskey plays Pauline and Kate Winslet plays Juliet Hume, aka Ann Perry. Here's a clip from old P.D. Jacks in the 1994 talkie about how he thinks the trial would have played out if it occurred today.
If that case were being tried now in New Zealand, do you think it would have the same outcome?
Yeah, I think it would. They were fairly obviously guilty of killing this woman, and so there was nothing they could do about that. It's interesting. I don't think necessarily that the murder would have happened if the events took place today, because I think there's a lot more tolerance. At the time, this friendship was seen as being unhealthy, and there was a concerted attempt to split the two girls up. But I think in this day and age, everyone would think, well, it's great, they're friends, and that's wonderful, and they wouldn't be judged so harshly.
What is the status of the girls now? Where are they? What are they doing?
Well, we've never really wanted to focus on where they are now, because we always hoped that their privacy would be, maintained. They've not wished to have anything to do with any journalists or anyone kind of investigating the case for the last 40 years. They had their names changed by the government when they were released from prison in 1959. But just recently, one of them, Juliet Hume, has been giving some interviews, and she is now a crime novelist, a murder novelist living in Scotland by the name of Anne Perry. And Pauline is still hasn't been discovered, and we've obviously heard various rumours about where she is and what she's doing, but without her having gone public, I don't really want to say what we know about her.
Something about that's so funny to me, that they're just like, he makes this movie about these like murderers from the 50s, and they're just like, so, what are they doing today? And he's like, well, one of them is just kind of living a quiet life. I don't really want to tell him too much about that because she wants her anonymity. And the other one is Stephen King.
Yeah, the other one is John le Carré. Are you familiar? Yeah, the reason he has that island out in the middle of nowhere is because he secretly murdered people. Even with Jackson and crew not wanting the focus to be on where the girls are now, the secret was out. Anne Perry was actually Juliet Hume, a convicted murderer. As Jackson mentioned in the clip, Anne Perry had, indeed, been speaking with the press. In 1994, her literary agent received a phone call about confirming whether her client, Anne Perry, was really Juliet Hume. Her agent reportedly had no idea and threatened to sue, but Perry very quickly told her that it was accurate. The journalist revealed her identity, so at that point, all there was damage control. In an interview with The Guardian, Perry said,
"It seems so unfair. Everything I had worked to achieve as a decent member of society was threatened, and once again my life was being interpreted by someone else. It had happened in court when, as a minor, I wasn't allowed to speak and I heard all these lies being told. And now there was a film, but nobody had bothered to talk to me. I knew nothing about it until the day before release. All I could think of was that my life would fall apart and that it might kill my mother." Kind of like I killed the other mother.
Yeah, kind of like I did with my friend's mother.
It's so funny that like everything went perfectly for her back in the 60s, where it's like all the situation was perfect for her to be able to just kind of shed that and move on and do something different with her life with no repercussions and none of her like skeletons in her closet following her, because of the literal geography of like New Zealand is this tiny little island, and nobody's ever going to fucking know anything that happened in New Zealand anywhere else in the world in a pre-internet age. And even in a television age, nobody's going to know. You could have been like the next Hitler and nobody would be the wiser. It all works out perfectly for her. She did this thing and then she's able to just leave and go just like start a new life and just become a crime novelist. And then the fucking guy who made Evil Dead is like, not so fast.
Dead Alive, thank you very much.
Oh God, I said Evil Dead, didn't I?
Yeah.
What the fuck? The guy who made Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead. That's where I got it confused. I got it confused because the original title is Brain Dead, and I'm just saying that to flex my knowledge so that I look like less of an idiot after saying Evil Dead instead of Dead Alive.
Quick, name the other two movies that are his weirdo gonzo horror movies.
Meet the Feebles.
Yep.
And Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
Bad Taste.
Yeah, Bad Taste, of course. With the alien dude.
Mm-hmm.
I love The Frighteners. I think that might be my favorite Peter Jackson movie.
Wow, all right. Yeah, I don't really like that movie. I want to like that movie. I think it just feels like the weird sanding down of all the things I love about Peter Jackson's early movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
I just love it as like a fun little ghost adventure.
Yeah.
Your whole life, and you've like started over. You think that you got it. You got clear. You're
You
free
think
and
you
clear.
know your super close friend, and then they say some wild out of pocket shit like Frighteners is the best fucking Peter Jackson
I didn't say it
movie.
was the best. I said it might be my favorite.
You looked at me in the eye and you said, "Fuck you, Frighteners forever."
The best is obviously The Lovely Bones.
Oh, obviously.
But then that little freak just fucking blows your cover in 1992.
94, yeah.
94.
Perry also had concerns over how the revelation would impact her relationship with the Mormon church, and they were surprisingly cool with it.
Oh yeah, all the people who founded our religion are murderers too.
Yeah, you're good. Perry recalled asking a senior member of the church whether her membership would be affected.
He said, "Your calling comes from God and he knows. He also told me that I would not lose a single friend over it. It didn't seem possible, but I have learned how decent and compassionate people can be. Not a single friend has gone. That surprised the hell out of me." What would you do? I mean, this is the ultimate test. What if you found out that when I was a kid, I murdered my best friend's... I guess it would be your mom then.
Yeah. I think that would be pretty hard for me to look past if you just admitted, like, yeah, I murdered someone's mom. I'd be like, I think the reason why it would be so hard to look past is because it would permanently recontextualize what I thought about you. You know what I mean? Like, it would make me question everything because, like, I can't see that.
I weirdly would almost find it easier to get past if I found out that, like, you killed somebody, like, during a robbery or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, if it was, like, you just, like, were committing a crime and killed somebody and then, like, you reformed and you, like, I was living a bad path. I got into some really bad stuff and I did this horrible thing and I regret it. I would almost find it easier to get past that than, like, you clearly were, like, mentally ill and criminally insane.
Yeah. I have a family friend who I recently found out committed manslaughter. It's literally not this person's fault, but they have no remorse for it because they're like, well, it's not my fucking fault. And I'm like, but you don't feel bad at all?
Yeah.
And it's really, like, impacted the way I think about them.
I would feel the same way because it would, like, ruin my life if I killed anybody, even if it was not remotely my fault.
Same.
If I was sitting at a light and a person walked in front of me, and then the person behind me slammed into me, and them slamming into me caused me to hit the person and kill them, would ruin my life.
Yeah.
I would think about it every day for the rest of my life, forever.
Me too. I'm Dave Baker. Not only did the Church of Latter-day Saints not seem to care, but the revelation didn't seem to negatively impact Anne Perry's writing career at all. She continued writing mostly mystery novels, many of which got on the New York Times bestseller list. In 1998, the Times of London listed her as one of the 100 masters of crime alongside the likes of Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle and Raymond Chandler. And in 1999, she won an Edgar Award for Best Short Story for Heroes, which appears in her Murder and Obsession anthology. At most, everyone now knowing that Anne Perry was Juliet Hume just became something interviewers brought up in conversation every now and then. There was also the matter of how Perry's relationship with Pauline Parker was portrayed in Heavenly Creatures. The film leans into the idea that the two were having a homosexual relationship, but Perry would later clarify that while their relationship was obsessive, they weren't lesbians. Most of the time, when Perry reflected on that era of her life, there was a certain level of detachment from the murder. One such moment came in a 1999 interview.
It's not something I want to go into. Apart from the fact that it's extremely painful, nobody's life is only their own. And if you start explaining yourself, you automatically start attributing qualities to other people who are not here to say, that's not how I felt or what I did. That's not fair. I don't like it done to me. Besides, this was 45 years ago. Couldn't people have forgotten it by now? Nations can rise and fall in that length of time. Listen, get the fuck over it, guys. I murdered a woman with a brick. Move on.
Yeah, man.
Fucking haters.
That is not the way to handle that. That is not the way to handle that. She continued,
I was 15 and ill at the time, and on medication, which apparently they discovered later on was quite mind-distorting. So it's not terribly surprising if I don't remember. I would like to remember the lessons to be learned from it, but not detail by detail. Listen, I'm in my lane. I'm manicured. I'm bubble bathed. I'm girl bossing it all the way to the couch to have a glass of wine and watch some Bachelorette. I don't want to think about the time that I brutally murdered a woman with a brick when I was a child, okay? So why don't you just back off a little bit, all right? I'm going full Chappell Roan on you right now. Celebrities have lives, and they don't need weirdos coming up to them and reminding them of the time that they murdered somebody with a brick, okay? Mind your business.
Here's the thing, though. What she says here about, being on mind-altering medication, like, I feel like that's also an important aspect here. Like, maybe that's her just using that as a get-out-of-jail-free card, no pun intended. But also, like, that stuff does happen, where some medications, the side effects are so chemically altering that you just fundamentally, like, live in another world.
Especially back in the day when they were just, like, fucking...
Yeah, here's some heroin,
giving
kid.
people shit, and they didn't even know what it did.
Yeah, totally. In 2002, she appeared on the true crime documentary TV movie Ian Rankin's Evil Thoughts. Rankin spoke with Anne Perry about her early life.
Extreme situations or changes in our life.
Yes, moral choices, and also I think very seldom does any tragedy occur where only one person is to blame. Usually a lot of circumstances have combined.
My God, she's the real-life J.B. Fletcher.
Yeah.
She looks like Angela Lansbury.
Yeah, for real.
It's not just one person, but we all contribute to things that happen for better or worse, and we are responsible for our own contribution.
In your personal life, you've had to deal with that, of course.
Yes, I have.
Why is this interview in the back of a 2000
car?
Honda Civic?
They're like, we're years ahead of...
Comedians in cars getting coffee.
Yeah, this is the original Comedians in Cars getting coffee.
Yeah, murderers in Civics getting interviewed.
Yes, when I was 13, I became quite seriously ill. When I was 15, I committed a crime as an accessory. I was involved.
What was the specific crime, Anne?
I helped someone kill another person.
Which person?
Their mother.
This was a friend of yours?
Yes.
It's an interesting way of framing it. I was an accessory. Were you an accessory? Or did you just do it too?
Yeah, because, I would almost lean towards, like, maybe you were the instigator of it and you were the one, like, egging on this other person.
You're the one that was going to be moved away.
Yeah, but at the very minimum, you just did it. Like, you weren't like, oh, like, I'll help you or whatever. Like, you, along with another person, murdered somebody. And you could just look at her diary entries and see that. She's writing about, like, fucking magical worlds where they're going to be together forever if they just have to, all they have to do is just murder the, like, she was fully on board with it.
A schoolgirl living in New Zealand helped to batter her friend's mother to death. She was found guilty of murder, but was only 15 years old.
It's also interesting. I forget exactly when it said she moved out of New Zealand, but she just has a Scottish accent.
How much of that, though, is code switching?
Yeah, it could be.
After serving their sentences, both girls left the country, changed their names, and disappeared. In 1994, the case was fictionalized in the film Heavenly Creatures.
Yvonne, love, we should be going back. We don't want to miss the bus. Juliet, you button up your coat, you get a chill. Look, Mother.
Was the mother awake, asleep? Was she...
Oh, she was awake.
You jumped on her or something?
Yes. Mm.
Yeah. And this all happened very quickly?
It was within a space of... My parents were separating. My father had lost his job. We were about to leave the country. And I felt I had no time to find a better solution. She told me that if I left, she would take her own life, and I believed her.
At the trial, the jury heard evidence that the girls had carried out a sustained and brutal attack on Pauline Parker's mother.
It must have been an extraordinary sensation at such a young age to be going through that process of judgment, I guess, by
Yes.
society. Going through the trial process and everything else.
Yes, and when you are that age, you're not allowed to speak.
In court, you mean?
Yes. So you cannot say anything about what you did or why you did it.
So you're not allowed to, for mitigating circumstances, you're not allowed to give your side of it?
No, not at all.
How did you feel when you actually were in prison? Did you get any perception at that time of how society was thinking about you?
Yes, to some extent. Regarded as a complete monster.
That must have been very upsetting also, especially when you were going through that process of coming to terms with it.
It's very difficult, but then I was in what is, I believe, regarded as the toughest prison in the Southern Hemisphere. And yes, it is a helpful process to feel that you are paying for what you have done. I also had a lot of people who were kind to me.
How long did you actually spend in prison?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Now, did that seem to you a long time? Did it seem too long, or...?
It was at the time endless, because I had no idea how long it was going to be. No, I don't think it was too long. Had it been a lot longer, it might have broken my ability to rebuild myself.
And at what point does the redemption come, do you think? I mean, at some point during that incarceration?
That's a very spiritual question to which I could only give you my own estimate of the answer. Is the redemption comes when you no longer wish to be that kind of person. When you understand that, when you see it as ugly and you understand why it's not what you want to be, not what you should be, not what you want to be.
Parent murderers and Packards getting pedantic.
Not because somebody outside is telling you this is not what you do, because you yourself say this is not who I want to be.
How do you feel about the fact that society requires people to be locked up, especially at such a young age, that we require what seems to be not redemption so much as a kind of vengeance?
Yeah, this isn't some like abolitionist shit where it's like, they shouldn't be locking up people for drug crimes or whatever. It's like she murdered.
She beat someone to death with a brick. She beat someone's face in.
It needs to be not only done but seen to be done, because it's supposed to be enough to prevent other people wanting to do the same. I think it would have been the worst thing that could ever happen to me in my life if somehow they'd said, well, look, you were under medical treatment, these are mind-distorting drugs, I'm sure you're not really wicked, you go ahead and forget about it. I think that would have been totally destructive to me.
How important was the punishment to you?
I think it's vital. I think until you feel that you have settled the debt, you can't move on. It's a bit like trying to walk with an open parachute behind you. By paying, you cut the strings and then you can move on. You can allow yourself to move on. I can sit and look you in the eye because I can say, yes, I have dealt with it. I believe that I have paid. I believe that I have been forgiven where it matters. And it now, for me, no longer exists. I can move on and be the best person I'm capable of being. And I think that's true of everybody. As long as you don't say, well, somehow or another it wasn't really me, it was that person, and somehow or another it didn't matter and I don't need to pay.
Do you find a certain irony?
This interview is a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing, man. I'm sorry. I also believe that, people deserve to be forgiven and deserve to kind of move past these debts to society that they may have incurred through misdeeds or poor decision-making. But I think there are some things that are really difficult to reconcile that level of forgiveness with. And I think as an individual being unequivocally, I have moved past this.
Yeah. Also, after just being in jail for 5 years.
5 years. I don't know.
She got the extreme minimum possible sentence for murdering somebody in cold blood.
Yeah. I don't know.
And she's
man.
I paid my debt and I can move on now. Now that I've fully paid my debt, I can look you in the eye knowing that I paid my debt by getting a prison sentence for murder that nobody else has ever gotten, ever. Also, she's saying oh, as long as you don't try to put it off on somebody else or try to blame it. And it's but she is doing that because she's saying oh, I was just on medication and I didn't know what I was doing. She is doing that.
Maybe that is a component of it. I don't know. Just from an optics perspective, if I murdered someone, I don't know I'd be doing an interview like this, just sitting in the back of a Mazda being yeah, dude, I fucking slammed that brick into her head, broski, and now I'm moving on.
I'm moving on because I went to prison for 5 years.
Anytime anybody brought that up, I'd be pretty solemn and there's no way to atone for this.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but years ago I went to a screening for this movie called Tales of Halloween. It was like an anthology horror thing, very similar to ABCs of Death or VHS. And all the directors for all the segments were there. And one of the segments, it was about these two criminals who kidnap what they think is the son of a famous rich director. But it turns out that it's like a little demon guy. And like, it's not the guy's son. It's just like a thing where like, if you are given this demon, you have to wait on it and like be its servant or else it'll kill you. And so they kidnap this demon thing, and it turns out to be this demon, and they try to give it back, and the guy's like, no, like it's your problem now. And then it's just them dealing with having this demon. And John Landis plays the director. And at the end of the short, basically they try to get rid of the demon, they can't get rid of it. It's kind of like almost like a horror comedy. And then they're like, fuck, I guess we're just going to have to keep this little demon guy. And so they're in their van, and the little demon guy's in the back, and he's like, all right, I'm going to go and like rob this convenience store real quick, and then we can get on the road. And then he goes inside, and he like robs it, and he comes back out, and the guy's gone. And then like his head pops up from the back, his partner. He's like, what are you doing back there? And then like the head just like falls out, and it's like a severed head. And then like the demon is like pops up, and his mouth is all bloody, and then that's the end. It's like the end of the thing. And the director was saying that the reason that they were able to get John Landis in it is because the guy who made the music for the short, he's like the son of a famous composer, film composer. So he's just like, just a Nepo baby dude that was helping them make this short. And so he like got in contact with some people, and they were able to get John Landis to be in it as a favor or whatever to his dad. And he was saying that originally in the script, the original way that it went was that they're in the car, and they're like, all right, we're going to go and rob this place, and we'll get on the road. And then he's like, wait in the car. And then they both go in, and they rob the place, and then they come back out, and then the head of John Landis pops up, and they're like, what are you doing in here? And then they drops, and it's the severed head, and then there's blood all over them. And it's kind of like, oh, even if you get rid of this thing, it'll still kill you. And it was supposed to be like a twist ending. And the director was saying that like the new ending kind of doesn't make as much sense. But the reason why we had to change it is because John Landis was like, I can't do anything that involves severed heads. I can't touch that subject.
As he should.
Yeah. And basically like he will never talk about that or do anything that would even get your mind in that space of thinking about him and severed heads.
That being said, fuck John Landis.
Yeah.
In a 2006 interview with the Daily Mail, Perry was asked if she ever thought about Honora Reaper. She responded,
no. She was somebody I barely knew.
In 2009, a documentary was released called Anne Perry Interiors that followed the day-to-day life of the typically reclusive author. As much as the film focuses on much of the mundanity of Perry's life, it does attempt to get to the heart of her psyche, opening with her philosophy on writing compelling characters that can't help but feel like a personal ethos towards herself. The documentary consists of interviews with Perry's brother, Jonathan, friends, and various people who work for her, all of whom skirt around what happened in Perry's past, usually referring to it as the occurrence or something like that. Only at the end does Perry truly confront the murder.
But you can't allow yourself to keep this wall up any longer. No, I hear you. I suppose I've protected myself so long. And, for the first 3 months afterwards, I cried. Well, no, for the first 3 months, I was absolutely frozen. And then I cried and cried and cried and cried. I never cried again, because once I start, I'll never stop. Also, my immediate family didn't want to talk about it, so I assumed that other people close to me also wouldn't. Are there any other questions? See, sometimes I think I've started out to say some of the things that really were the worst about that place. And then I feel as if I'm just upsetting other people and I should shut up.
See, many of us can understand what the police was, because many of us read and hear and things of other people's experiences. But nobody can experience the emotions, your emotions. I just love you so much, Anne, and I want people to know the real you.
Man, these motherfuckers are staring each other down.
The stare down.
I was going to go with my father to South Africa, to where his sister lived. And Mother was going to go with Bill. And then when Pauline heard about this, which must have been about a day afterwards, that was when the world seemed to fall apart for her. Now, I was frightened of her in the fact that I thought she really would take her life. But she was what I now know is bulimic. She used to throw up after every meal. I mean, you could smell it on her. And she was absolutely a bag of bones. And her skin, she had a very, very good, very fine skin. But you put a plaster on it and it used to suppurate. Because she was so, and I thought she really would. And that it'd be my fault. Now that is stupid. But I felt absolutely trapped. And it was almost as if I was doing something.
Fun fact that I just learned, and if I hadn't, I wouldn't know what the fuck she just meant right by that. But in New Zealand and Australia, they call Band-Aids plasters.
The fuck? Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I just learned that.
I knew it was wrong, and I knew I would have to pay for it, and I knew it was stupid. But I was terrified that she really would take her life and it would be my fault. I felt as if I couldn't walk away. I would have given anything I had to be able to somehow get out of it. But I didn't see a way. And I couldn't go to my mother and I couldn't go to my father. Jonathan was only 10. And I did something stupid which I've regretted for the rest of my life. But I can't undo it.
Are you buying this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. It's amazing the different levels of characterization from different points in her life, right?
Yeah. It starts off from like, I'm just going to pretend like this never fucking happened.
Yeah.
And then it's like, yes, I did it. It's fine though. I've moved on. It's not a big deal. Get over it. Calm down.
And then everyone didn't respond well to that. And then she's like, actually, I'm deeply remorseful.
It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. It haunts me every day of my life. And it's all my friend's fault anyway. She did it. She made me.
Yeah. But here's the thing is, I think all of those things can be true.
Yeah. They could all live together. Like,
yeah,
you leave and you think you're escaping something and you just want to move on from that. And then you get found out. And then your initial reaction is to try to downplay it. And then as you process it more after you were forced to confront it, you can start. I mean, it's like, what's his name from The Act of Killing?
Yeah.
The whole bookend of that documentary is him going to the site where he executed quote unquote communists and kind of like bragging about it. And being like, yeah, this is where we did it. We were fucking awesome. We were fucking gangsters. And then the end of the movie is him going to the same place and vomiting from being haunted by what he did. Because, Jeremy Oppenheimer, through the course of making this movie, like kind of forces this guy to become more self-aware of the things that he did.
So bleak.
Yeah.
In 2017, Anne Perry would leave her Scotland home and go to Los Angeles in the hopes that she could play a greater role in having her books adapted for TV. She suffered a heart attack in December of 2022, and on April 10th, 2023, she died at a Los Angeles hospital at the age of 84. Following her death, her brother Jonathan, who worked as her assistant for years, spoke with the New Zealand Herald, hoping to shed better light on what his sister was really like.
She was a complex character and no doubt a talented writer, but there remained a streak of dishonesty and selfishness in her. She did not regard herself as being psychotic or being mad, but it was pretty clear to me looking at it. He's like, now that she's dead, the gloves are off. She was a bitch.
He even cast doubt on some of the claims that Perry had made about why she went through with the murder.
It was one of her mantras, which she trotted out regularly when she did what she did because she feared Pauline would commit suicide. But there was very slender evidence of that. It was almost as if she believed it was noble of her to dispose of the mother, to save Pauline's life. It wasn't murder, but moiter. It was sanitized and the moral value of it reversed. Did she act to preserve Pauline's life? No. She was a teenager wrapped up, absorbed with the moment, not thinking it through. In many ways, she was just as psychotic in later life as she was earlier. Like, the brother is like fucking going in on her.
Dude.
Like, he worked as her assistant, and then she's like, she dies, and he's just like, tell all expose, baby.
Look, now that these checks ain't cashing, fuck it. This bitch was crazy.
He goes in on her.
Yeah, dude. But what about Pauline Parker, who changed her name to Hillary Nathan? As far as we know, as of April 2024, she's still alive. Reporters tracked her down around the time that Heavenly Creatures came out, too. She was living in a village called Who in Kent, England, and by all accounts was a recluse, having started a writing school for children. Reportedly, when the journalists tried to speak to her at her home, she told them,
"I've never had another name. I'm sorry, you've got the wrong person."
Her sister, Wendy, did speak to the press and had this to say about Hillary.
She's living in solitude. She's deeply religious. She leads a very unusual existence. She hasn't got a TV or a radio, so you would never have heard what Anne Perry had to say, and she wouldn't care.
At some point after Heavenly Creatures put her in the spotlight, Hillary moved to an even more remote location in the Orkney Islands of Scotland. It's assumed this is where Hillary still is. Several accounts confirmed the two never tried to reach out to each other after being imprisoned. Whereas Anne Perry sought and obtained the life she dreamed of as a teenager, Pauline/Hillary went in the opposite direction. Anne Perry's story made for sensational headlines. A mystery writer frequently writing about murder committed one herself. How could outlets not find that enticing? Depending on where you look at it from, Perry's story could have been one of second chances or the lengths that people will go to in order to recreate the narrative of their own life. When speaking after his sister's death, Jonathan brought up the quote from Oscar Wilde, "Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future."
Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. My sister is a huge bitch.
The thing we haven't talked about while recording this is that obviously this person's trying to make sense of their past in terms of that through art, they're habitually getting away with and then being caught in the act of murder. It's very fascinating that you would commit murder, whether you fully repent or not. Your brain is now hardwired to that's the only thing you can think about. So you spend your entire life writing down fictional stories of people murdering other people and then getting caught for it.
Yeah, and it's like iterating over and over again on the moment. And like, what ways could I have tried to get away with it? Like, they got caught in such a kind of hilariously stupid way. Like, just no pretense that you didn't do this. You just like walked up covered in blood. You're a fucking idiot. And then so like retroactively trying to like rethink that, like, you know, how could I have tried to cover up the murder? It's almost like you're forever trying to figure out the perfect crime, but you're your own detective. So you're like checking your own work and solving the crime that you're coming up with. And you never quite figure out that perfect crime.
Yeah, you're always convicting yourself.
Yeah.
Which is in some ways fascinating. But also, this woman murdered someone.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to look at it in this resolution because, like, the story I told earlier about the dude who got attacked by the homeless man with the katanas and then people found out he was a school shooter. And there was a big conversation around that of, like, redemption or forgiveness or restorative justice. And, like, you know, he did this, but then he went to prison for years. There were a lot of people who were saying, like, no, like, shooting other kids is like unforgivable. It's like there's no coming back from that. You're a piece of shit. I mean, most people were saying that basically. But then there's also these beliefs about restorative justice and, you know, forgiving people and that, you know, there's no such thing as unforgivable act. Some people say that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that or not. I definitely think that there is a path to forgiveness, but it's just like, you know, where's the line of that? Like if somebody fucking, you know, murders and rapes a baby, like I can't imagine ever being like, you're cool, man. There's a line there. And I think most human beings like don't really know where that line is. I think that there's like a belief system over here and there's a belief system over here. And the way that those two things can coexist, how you can believe in restorative justice and forgiveness, but also know that you would never forgive somebody who like murdered a baby is because you just don't let those two things ever touch. You never go to that blurry line there and try to like solve where it lands. The conversation was happening around that guy, but it's that conversation always lacks nuance, I think. And not that I'm saying that like I don't agree with what people are saying, but people are always talking about it at a very surface level. This guy did this thing. He is a piece of shit. He doesn't deserve redemption, or he shouldn't be able to have an audience on TikTok and have all these followers and make money from it or whatever. It's a very surface level discussion about the things that he did. looking at it like this, where it's that story, but it also, you're able to absorb all of the context of it. You're able to absorb the life of the person and how they sort of like reacted and interacted with the thing that they did for like 80 years. And you're able to look at how other people acted and reacted to it for like 80 years.
And how her brother was just like, no.
And I feel like it gives like a much more complete view of not a one-size-fits-all philosophy for all of these things, but just specifically for Anne Perry.
Yeah.
Like, you can absorb the story and you can come out of the end and you can just kind of definitively say, I think she was probably a bad person and probably didn't deserve to be forgiven for what she did. But it's only after sort of absorbing all that and kind of seeing like, oh, she clearly doesn't really have any remorse for it.
And when she does, it feels a little kind of performative.
Yeah, it's like she's like lying about the motivations. She's lying about whose fault it was. She's trying to place blame on her friend. She's seeming to be very performative about how she's like acting this grief and this remorse. You can come out of the other end of it and you can have a much fuller idea of whether you personally think this person is deserving of forgiveness. That isn't just the binary of like, does the crime seem forgivable or not? There's like this whole wealth of data points of like the things that she did, the way that she behaved, how remorseful she seemed. And obviously that can't exist for every person, but it just feels like a much more fair way of judging somebody rather than just being like, I looked at what this person did for 2 seconds and like, fuck them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult because most people that have committed wrongs, they don't have the benefit or the excuse. Like, I think all of this, there's a shadow over all of this that she was a minor, you know?
Yeah.
And whether there's mind-altering drugs, whether there's just not having the emotional maturity to know how to handle things, like, my heart goes out to that. I don't think I would have ever murdered someone at 14. In fact, I know I wouldn't have. But at 14, 15, even 16, 17, fuck, even 18, you're still, like, figuring things out to a certain degree, right? You're still, I think once you're in, you know, your late teens, early 20s, I think it's a little bit like you're pretty much who you are and you've learned to deal with things in a certain way, right? But when you're 13, 14, 15, especially those isolating weirdos who find that one person they can connect with, like, that's such a strange, elemental, electric connection that I can understand why that would spiral out into maybe a codependent and a not so healthy attachment style. That being said, when you look at the rest of her life, I don't know what it says, whether it's damning or absolving, but the fact that you spend your entire life making these mystery stories shows that you are, whether you want to be or not, defined by this thing, you know?
Yeah.
You know, like, what is the ego there to be like, why can't I just move on from talking about this murder? I want to talk about this book I wrote about murder, you know? Like,
yeah.
It's very, very sad and very compelling. And it's been a while since we've used the K word. There's a lot of kayfabe here. But the cool thing about it, or the aberrant aspect of this version of kayfabe, is that while there is the kayfabe of like, she's pretending to be fucking Anne Perry, it's really like internal kayfabe, where it's someone building up a sense of who they are in juxtaposition to this crime. And the interesting discussion to me is, are they rebuilding this idea of who they are as a genuine thing, or is it an artificial lattice to frame an identity around so they can hide inside that identity and never have to come to terms with what they've done?
Yeah. Which, to be fair, if I murdered somebody, I probably would do the same thing. Yeah. In the same way that, you know, sometimes you can kind of get lost in your work because you're, you know, sometimes if you're lost in your work, then those thoughts can't be thought. Mm-hmm. Those thoughts don't creep into your mind. I don't think this is like a trying to sound noble or whatever. I wouldn't have murdered somebody when I was 15. Like, I just wouldn't have. I know I wouldn't have. I'm not even trying to sound like a good person. I just wouldn't have done that. I think that's just kind of like the bare minimum of not being horrible.
The Daily Beast, Deep Cuts co-host Dave Baker actually did murder someone when he was 15.
Will Summer, previous guest on the show, you did us dirty. You exposed Dave. But if I did it,
in the OJ parlance,
in the famous words of OJ Simpson, I think I definitely would do that. Like, if I spend all day thinking, because it wouldn't work with other things. I don't think I could bury myself in other work. I think it would creep in. But if I spend all day trying to come up with scenarios for other people murdering people, I think that would be a pretty effective way of like staving off the demons.
Yeah, this is my tax deduction app that I've been developing. It's called How the Fuck Do I Get Away with Murder? I mean, taxes.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm Dave Baker.
And I'm Spandrew Spice.
If you'd like to find me on the internet, you can do so at heydavebaker.com. You can also find my book, Mary Tyler Moorhawk, wherever books are sold. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can get my book, Deadbolt, AI Private Eye, by going to my website, dapricerights.com. It's a comic about a robot detective in the future solving crimes. And no, I did not create that comic because I'm actually, when I was a kid, I was a robot that solved a crime. And now I'm just like iterating on that for the rest of my life to try to forget about the fact that I used to be a robot detective. That's not the case. It's just a story I thought of. Has nothing to do with my personal life. You can also follow us on social media by going to Facebook and searching Deep Cuts Podcast. You can join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group where we talk about the show, make memes, other cool stuff, have a cool little community there. You can also join our Discord server by going to bit.ly.com/deepcutsdiscord, where we also talk about the show, make memes, play games, and other cool stuff like that. You can follow us on Instagram at Deep Cuts Pod. You can follow us on TikTok at Mystery Treehouse. And you can follow me on TikTok at Deadboy Detective. Deep Cuts is a production by Boy Genius Media. If you'd like to find this show and others like it, please visit boygeniusmedia.com or deepcutspod.com.
If you want to join in on post-episode discussions, please join the Deep Cuts Podcast Facebook group. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional video content.
The incidental music for this episode was created by D. Catalano, whose music can be found at wekeepoddhours.bandcamp.com. This episode was written by special guest writer Mike Bedard.